Hey there, friends. It's Kelly Tenen, your expert on employee engagement and all things talent development. So, interestingly enough, I wanted to share some of my personal experiences with you recently, kind of in the employee engagement space, specifically around the healthcare sector. So, I recently attended a healthcare summit that was talking a lot about employee engagement, employee retention, and mental health in the workplace, which was really interesting. And that got me thinking about a lot of things. But actually, what really kind of pushed me over that thinking cliff, so to speak, was the fact that my husband has been hospitalized off and on, really for the past year, but in the last 3 months and then the last 3 weeks, we've been dealing with some significant things that have been happening. And he was hospitalized here locally where we are recently. And I wanted to talk about some of those experiences that we had, specifically how they tie back to employee engagement. So interestingly enough, looking at some statistics, kind of just generally speaking in the healthcare sector as a whole, just generally speaking, statistically speaking from Statistica, only 30% of those in the United States that were surveyed in this particular survey are happy with the healthcare system in the United States. And those of you that know me know I'm an avid reader and podcast listener, and I've listened to a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've read several books around this space, and it's quite eye-opening and really interesting to me. In fact, a little fun fact is healthcare plans and employment actually weren't tied together until after World War II. It was actually one of the things that were kind of put together as job benefits to help get people back into the workforce. And so I find it really interesting. And although I'm very grateful for the health insurance that we do have, I just find it fascinating that still nearly 80 years later, this is kind of a trend we're still following. It's just one of those random facts that fascinate me throughout the day. But what does that mean? That means 70% of people are not happy with the healthcare system. And I can understand why, because I've seen myself firsthand some flaws in the system, or some opportunities in the system for improvement, I should say. And I will also preface this by saying I have a lot of friends and family that work within the healthcare system, and I also understand deeply how hard and taxing the job is. So I think there's a lot of things that are, for lack of a better term, kind of stacked up against the industry. But I also do think that there's lots of room for improvement. And the other thing that's interesting, another stat that I read when I was reading that article, is 50% of nurses and doctors say that their job role as a nurse or a doctor has changed significantly in the past 10 years. I would say it's probably even changed significantly in the last 3 to 4 years, because I think COVID changed a lot of things, added a lot of stressors, maybe improved some things, maybe made some things worse. And so that's interesting too. With the onset of those changes, are we losing people in the industry? And I think that there's definitely a shortage for sure. And nearly 50% of the people, according to a Forbes article, 50% of people that work in the healthcare industry, and this is just the industry as a whole, are going to leave their jobs in the next few years, or it's estimated that they will leave their jobs. So it'll be interesting to see in terms of that attrition, if those spaces can be filled, or are we just going to be left with a greater shortage. And I speak to this shortage because my family's experience, we were recently hospitalized, my spouse was, for a number of days. I just found it really interesting, the level of, or lack thereof, I should say, of communication, compassion, and even critical thinking that really took place. And I could really see a sense of disconnect in terms of the engagement among some of the nursing staff that was taking place. And so I mentioned kind of 3 terms there: communication, compassion, and critical thinking. So I really kind of broke this scenario down into 3 C's, so to speak, just to make it easy to break down when I was thinking about this whole scenario. Communication being a big one, or lack thereof, I should say. Now, I will say this, I give kudos to two of my husband's doctors here locally, because they were really on, well, three of them, I should say three, because they were really on top of communicating with him and staying on top of this particular issue that he is having. Where we had the disconnect of communication was between the care that my husband was receiving at the hospital and the care that was being recommended or had been recommended by his regular doctors that attended to him. It actually came down to a conversation that I had to have with an individual, and I just openly asked, I said, why are we not making this a community of practice? Why are we not treating this as a community of practice? And instead of being siloed in your silo, or I'm here in my little vacuum or my little Star Trek tube, why are you not engaging with other people who have treated him and understand the bigger picture? And the response that I got was, well, because he's being treated here and not there. And then that's when I kind of went around again and was like, well, I think we need to think of this in terms of a bigger picture. And I go back to one of my many favorite writers, but Adam Grant, and he wrote the book Think Again, and how it's helpful for us to be challenged by those that think differently from us. And I realized too that there's a lot of other things going on in the background there, in terms of there may have been some contractual things between their office and the hospital that were also going on, which really prohibited everybody from communicating together to give my spouse the best care that he needed. They were wanting to do a procedure that had already been attempted and would have not really been in his best interest. And a simple communication among parties would have been really helpful in this instance. But I just noticed among the teams at this particular facility that they really worked kind of in their own cubicle space and didn't really kind of venture outside of that to explore, okay, what's already been done? What could we try? What's going to be the best course of action for this patient? And so I think communication is huge. And I recognize from a process standpoint, from an administration, a political standpoint, that there's a lot of irons in that particular fire. But when did we step away from a situation where we're not really dealing in what is the best interest for our customer? And at the end of the day, that's what we were as a customer. So as an organization, it's our job to serve our customers. I just would challenge entities to think about that. Who are we going to talk to, and who can we communicate with that is really going to best serve our customer? Or are we even communicating with our customer to find out what it is they want and they need us to do? The second piece is the compassion piece. I think compassion, empathy, all of those kind of roll into kind of together. And so empathy and compassion, I think at times are roles or critical traits that leaders need to have. Now, I recognize in many workspaces, not just the healthcare industry, we often become desensitized to things that happen because they happen all the time. Like for me, there are certain tasks that are second nature to me in my role, but I have to remember that my customers, my clients, don't do those tasks every day. So it can seem very daunting. It can seem very stressful. And so again, I think going back to the customer. Who is your customer and what is it that your customer needs? And sometimes your customer needs a little bit of compassion and empathy around what you are going to do, and eliminating some of that jargon and that industry speak, and really taking time to understand what's going through their mind and how can I be compassionate towards the particular thing that maybe is happening to them. Again, the customer. We never know on the other end, I think, what people are thinking and what they're feeling. And so I just think that compassion and empathy is really important. And that, not all the time, but in our particular experience, was something that was lacking a little bit. And again, I have an understanding of that because I get it, that things become second nature to you and you see them all the time, but your clients or your customers don't. And so how can you show them a little bit of compassion, a little bit of empathy to lead them through a particular process? And then the last piece there was the critical thinking piece. And I think that goes back to communication, but what are we doing again to challenge ourselves to be better? And not just the status quo. And I saw a lot of status quo at this particular facility. And I think as an organization, again, if we could turn that dial in terms of a culture and generating maybe a culture of communication and compassion and even passion, what would that mean for your return in the hospital setting? What would that mean in terms of patient care? What would that mean in terms of their recovery? Critical thinking is huge. And again, I just saw a lot of individuals operating in silos. The other thing that I saw was a lot of checking the boxes. And what I did was kind of equate it to, when I was describing it to somebody, is there's a checklist or a job aid, and we're just making sure that all of the boxes are checked on the job aid. And we're not doing anything more than that. And I think that that piece came down to really the engagement aspect. I just overall saw a lot of employees that just really weren't engaged in what they were doing. And it was evident by their attitudes and the fact that they were just kind of checking the box. And I think it could be attributed to a lot of things. They're overworked, probably underpaid. It's a hard job. And you're dealing with this objective. I totally get that. But again, your customer, the end user, needs to have the best experience possible. And as an organization, what could that mean in the healthcare industry? Again, what would that mean if we turned the dial just 10% in terms of patient health, patient recovery, patient experience and needs in the hospital setting itself? So just some things I was thinking about based on my own experiences and my spouse's experience in this particular hospital setting. You know, I mean, I really do give a lot of credit to healthcare workers because I know that the job is so hard. At the same time, there's a lot of room for improvement. And I hope we can do better as a group. As somebody who works with organizations, you know, how can I help those organizations get better to improve their patient/customer experience, but to also improve the experience of their internal customers, because their internal customers being their employees, because to me, that kind of environment or output that we were getting from the people in that environment says something to me about what maybe is going on internally in terms of a culture. With that, I just wanted to share my experience. I hope, at least in my experience, it can get better. I have to think on how to fix it a little bit. And so maybe I'll do a follow-up segment in terms of what my thoughts are on how to fix that. Maybe the next video will be something like that. In the meantime, I wish everybody well, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Don't forget to follow me on social media or my website, and subscribe if you like this content. Take care.